What is up, gamers? I realized I forgot to record an intro for this video, and I just finished editing it, so here's an intro from like a week later. But this is part 2 of commons and rares you should own. This will have Keter Sanctuary, Stoicheia, and Lyrical Monasterio in this video. If you want to see budget options of the other 3 nations, I made a video last week going over those. With all that being said, let's hop in. For Keter Sanctuary, we're starting off with the original Alden Rideline, which have you reveal cards with different grades from your hand in order to check top 5 to call stuff. So for grade 1, you'll call a grade 1 or less, and then for grade 2, you'll call a grade 2 or less. Which this rideline can be good in decks that don't have really a good rideline themselves. Starting with some grade 3s, we have Felicita, which can Cow Blast 2 and retire itself to give your Vanguard +1 drive if you Persona Road that turn, which is really good in Vanguard decks that restand. So like Dark the Greya utilizes this card pretty well. Instead of going 2 drive 1 drive, it'll go 3 drive 2 drive, since it gets +1 drive for the turn. Then we have Dark Strain, which just gives all your grade 3 units boost. So all the grade 3 options are like pretty niche for this nation. Grade 2s have a lot more generic units that are just generally good in a bunch of different decks, like Prosperous Dragon, which can Energy Blast 4 to draw a card whenever it attacks, and Sadie, which whenever it's placed by an ability, you can Cow Blast 1 to draw, and it gets +5k power for the turn. So between these 2 cards, they're really good budget ways to draw cards, because drawing cards is one of the strongest mechanics in just card games in general. And Sadie is an outstanding budget option in a multitude of decks. I use it a lot whenever I build budget decks. Then for any encounter deck, there's Deoring, which allows you to just discard a card and add a card with the same clan as your Vanguard, allowing you to filter into specific pieces you need, or sometimes perfect guards if they've got a Stride deck set. And we have Drilling Angel, which can put a unit from drop into soul and look at top 3 and call a unit with the same name as the unit that was put into soul. It's really good in decks that want specific units in their soul. So like Minerva has played it in the past, and Youthbook can play it as well. It's also just a free soul whenever you play it. And really, calling the unit is just a random plus side the card has. For some grade 1s, we have Groggaeon, which is a countercharger for Divine Skill decks, so Raziel and Alden, and the Fated King. For soul charge options, we have Leah, which soul charges 2 when placed by an ability, and Fpuri, which soul charges whenever it boosts, and your Vanguard is a grade 3 or higher. Fpuri I use a lot in budget decks myself. There's Harvick, which whenever it's discarded from your hand by an ability, you can soul blast 1 to draw a card, making it a pretty decent option in decks that discard random cards from their hand a lot. And then we also have Stormfeather Owl, which can call itself from drop if you've played a normal order that turn, allowing you to build a board a lot easier. And then the last 2 grade 1s is Perius, which can block an attack if it's the 5th battle of that turn or more, and you bind it from rearguard, allowing you to help deal with decks that blindly attack a lot. And then Reedy, which at some point is going to see a lot more play. You can Soul Blast 2 and make your trigger powers gain +5k more power. And this is not once per turn, so every time you use Reedy, you buff up the power that your triggers give very effectively. Youthbook has played this in the past. Bastion can play it because of how many drive checks the deck just gets. Reedy is also played in Premium with Gold Paladin because of a card like Ultima, which gives trigger power to all of your units, making Reedy just have it gain so much power in the process. And then for some orders, we have a Warrior's Rest, which can Energy Blast 2 and give 2 units +10k whenever they're boosted. And then if you have 5 more units, you draw a card, allowing you to be super aggressive with this card. If you're able to build a full board, then you use this card to have your front or rear guards essentially be base 20k. And the big order that a lot of decks play is Wisdom of the Beginning that cleared the world, which draws 2 and calls 2 whenever you use it, allowing you to essentially build a board without losing card economy. This is often the order of choice played in decks that run the order package like Sir Gaon and Taithvault, but also a Warrior's Rest is another good option. And then for a couple of blitz orders, we have Heavenly Bright, which is the anime's favorite blitz order ever, allowing you to guard at the top card of the deck and give it +10k shield. And then lastly is Mine as Your Country's Foundation, which is a blitz order that you discard a card. It's 5k shield, and then you also guard it up to 4 heal triggers from your drop zone, which is a really cool blitz order. It hasn't really seen much play outside of like hostage decks, but it's a very interesting choice, especially if we get more heals that gain more shield on certain situations. So I think it's just a cool card to own, especially for the future. Next up is Stoicheia, which has a lot of different pretty good options. For Ridelines, we have the original Zorga Rideline with Rancor Chain and Black Tear's Husk Dragon. Mega Chain is a pretty insane grade 1 in the Rideline. You Soul Blast 1 to draw 2, and then you discard an order, or you discard 2 cards. But a lot of the time you play this in decks that run a ton of orders in their deck, and you can often pair it with Black Tear's Husk Dragon, which allows you to add an order back whenever you ride it. This Rideline has seen play in a multitude of decks and is very good, but also for token decks, there's the Robo Rideline. Essentially gives you 2 plant tokens throughout the 2 turns, and gives you a ton of aggression with it. The cool thing about these 2 Ridelines is you can kind of mix and match them into a lot of different decks. There were times where Leonore played the grade 1 of the Robo Rideline, but a different grade 2. And same thing with Vanguard Chain in other decks. So those are generically just the best Ridelines that a lot of decks utilize. Outside of Ridelines, there's Rotting Usopp Dragon. Whenever you play a grade 3 or higher Vanguard, then you can call Rotting Usopp Dragon for free from your drop zone, making it just a free body that comes in a lot. This is really good in decks that retire their own stuff or have ways to re-ride mid-battle phase, allowing you to generate extra attacks. There's Coffin Shooter, which can bind an order from drop in order to call it to an open rearguard from drop, giving you free rearguards, and also gives you bound orders, which can come up in certain decks like Zorga Nadir, where they really like having orders and bind. There's a lot of good grade 1 options as well. A big one is Burrow Mushrooms, which goes into Soul in order to called 2 plant tokens, essentially giving you a really good aggro tool while also giving you a soul that you can use for other effects. And helping out with Burrow Mushrooms and other early game ways to make plant tokens, there's Blessing to the Flowering Buds, which makes all your base 5k power units gain 10k during your turn. So all your plant tokens become 15k, and even your vanilla triggers would also be 15k power. And they do get the effect that whenever they hit, you get to add them back to hand. For other grade 1s, we have Prize Trident, which can go to Soul and countercharge whenever you've attacked for the 5th time this turn. There are a ton of Star Care decks that can reach 5 attacks and can make use of this. So Flagberg, Maelstrom, Magnolia, soon Levidross could make use of this. Really just a lot of decks have Prize Trident as an option that you can use. Lastly, for grade 1s is Bilber, which can Soul Blast 1 to retire itself to check top 3 and call something to the back row, and then you discard the rest. It accelerates your drop zone and also gives you the option to dig deeper into your deck to find specific units. Because it's a Soul Blast, you can use it as early as turn 1 in order to start digging through your deck, and sometimes you can cheat out grade 3s on your turn 1 and then use those grade 3s on your grade 2 turn. Bilber has really only seen play in Premium at one point, where Grand Blue can use it to like turbo through their deck. But I've played it in a couple decks in Standard. I really like it sometimes in Magnolia Mask, just to help find your Dragon Tree Wretches. And I've played it in Veleno before Set 2 came out, just to help be able to find Fiore or other Veleno units a lot easier. Now for the big thing about this nation, which is the orders, there's quite a few good ones. First up is Nectar of Sensationalism, which is a big power booster and also gives crit if you have at least 15 cards in drop, making it really good in decks that have rearguards that restand. Veleno can play it, Maelstrom can play it, Flagberg can play it. Really, any deck that has a restanding rearguard can play this, or a really big rearguard with a really powerful Guard Restrict can play this. Then we have Tearful Malice, which retires 2 rearguards to draw a card, and you put Tearful Malice into Soul and you countercharge 1, making it just a generically good countercharger that also gives Soul and can also dig deeper into your deck. And it's pretty good in decks that just spawn a bunch of free rearguards, so Zorga really likes this. Or any deck that generates plant tokens could play this card, since plant tokens are usually pretty easy to access. And there's also Spiritual Body Condensation, which revives something from drop for a Soul Blast and gives it plus 5k power, giving you a really solid revive effect in basically any deck, and very often just randomly sees play sometimes. And then for some blitz orders, we have Shadow Dreamblade from Veleno being a 20k shield, but it's also just generic, so Zorga does play this sometimes, in tandem with Abolishment of Sins, and also in tandem with Overcoming the Unnatural Death. These 3 cards were a pretty good package that the deck played, where you can keep reusing Overcoming the Unnatural Death in order to get back Dreamblade and Abolishment of Sins, in order to keep reusing these effects each and every turn, allowing you to guard free attacks and also use Abolishment to dig deeper into your deck. We also have Ghost Chase, which has been recently seeing play in Night Rose in Japan, where it allows you to bounce a rearguard back into your hand. It's really good in decks that have a lot of free ways to revive their stuff. So Zorga in the early days played this quite a lot, and now Night Rose plays it because they have easy ways to find and recycle their Perfect Guards or the OTs that they can guard with. I've also personally tried it in Magnolia Mask, and it wasn't that bad in there. To be able to bounce back all of your on-play effects, so like your Dragon Tree Wretches or your Force Grow Dragon, and bouncing Force Grow to be able to recall a whole board on your next turn is very powerful. And then lastly is the Watermelon Blitz Order, which is a 10k shield, but also gives your Vanguard the skill that for the turn, whenever your opponent's front row unit stands or is placed, then your Vanguard gets plus 5k power for the turn, making it really good into decks that play a ton of front row rear guards during the turn, or have effects to restand or re-ride into stuff during the battle phase. So a deck that this card's pretty good into is Shoujo Doji. It basically deters them from using their Tsukio Dachis in order to gain a ton of attacks, and really forces them into having to build really tall strategies, which can be a lot easier for some decks to deal with, like Zorga, which can farm Perfect Guards into their hand. But really, any Stoicheia deck can play this. And then lastly is Lyrical Monasterio, which oddly enough doesn't have that many generically good commons and rares, because a lot of it is filled with supporting the 80 different Ridelines. But there are still a few that are pretty good. For potential generic Ridelines, there's the Willista Rideline, which searches for your gem that you can use, and then your grade 2 Willista will draw a card whenever you use the gem. Now, this is kind of cheating because you kind of have to play the double rare grade 1 gem to make this really good, but it essentially lets you draw 2 cards deep into your deck on turn 2 and helps you be aggressive. And it's really good whenever you play the order package if you end up spending more money on that. There's also the Sienna Rideline, which can be good in specific metas that want to keep the rear guards and don't clear the board. And it's pretty good during the early game where it can detour your opponent from calling a bunch of things early on. And then lastly is the newest Rideline, which is for Vert. That Rideline is really good at being able to dig for cards that are grade 2 or higher, and is just generic and is really free. This Rideline has been seeing a lot of play in a variety of different decks, and it should be something you should pick up. I don't know why though. Aqua is a double rare, which I think is the first card in a Rideline that is higher than a rare, which is pretty interesting. Outside of Ridelines though, we have Annalise, which can go into soul and give something plus 5k at the end while it attacked while boosted, giving you more soul and a power boost, and a way to empty a rearguard slot for other cards that get called through a variety of effects. For a Franchette budget option, there's Regretta, Energy Blast 4 to bounce your other front row rearguard to hand and give this unit plus 5k, making it a 15k beater, and also bounce your front row rearguard, also opening up that slot that you can call something to. There's All Eyes on Me Trues, which whenever your other unit attacks from the back row center column, you can bounce it back to hand, so Carmount can play this. And it's also a 15k shield whenever you guard with it, making it a pretty interesting card that can fill in some niches within decks. A pretty good generic card though is Sylphia, which is an 18k beta if one of your other rearguards was bot backed during the battle phase, and whenever it hits you can bot back Sylphia to draw a card and countercharge 1, giving it having on hit pressure and also being a nice 18k swing, which is pretty awkward for the opponent to guard, and is just one of the better generic countercharges the nation has. For grade 1s, there's Siska, which is one of the newest and one of the better budget options you can play in decks. If you don't have another copy of it in play, then you can perform either Counter Blast 1 to draw or Energy Blast 3 to give it plus 10k power for turn, giving it a lot of different versatility on being an 18k beater or a draw, and is really nice to fill up a deck list if you're just needing a couple more cards and you're missing like something really expensive. This is generally just a good replacement for a lot of different cards. For a really cool common, we have Cursone, which whenever it boosts, you can blast 1 and give the boosted unit the skill that whenever it hits a Vanguard, you can discard a card and call something from your hand to an open rearguard. So this is really good in decks that have a restanding unit, and that restanding unit hits really, really high numbers, because if the opponent lets that attack hit, now you get an extra attack off of it. Now, granted, you also have to be able to have a way to remove your other front row rearguard from play in order to call something to that rearguard. So like Chris Rain could play this. But outside of that, there's potential for this card to see some play if there's a deck that fulfills that type of condition really well. And then there's also Rusius, which is a grade 1 with only 3k power, but whenever you play it, you give 10k power to something. It's really good in decks that are able to bounce their rearguards and be able to recall. So you can keep recalling Rusius in order to keep giving power to stuff. In Premium, you have different ways to call things to rearguard during the opponent's turn. So you can have Rusius come in and give 10k power to your Vanguard, making it easier to guard attacks. It's also really good in a deck like Carmount, which really cares about the power thresholds and having really big powers on the Vanguard. And it can be good in decks that have restanding units. So if there's ever a grade 3 that restands twice, this card will be crazy in there. So yeah, Rusius just has a ton going for it and has a ton of different types of effects it would like and can support. And then last grade 1 is Justine, which is an interesting card. It's a 6k that can call itself to an open rearguard whenever it's discarded. It's really good in Premium because there's a variety of ways to discard during your battle phase, and you can keep stacking force markers and have this be a primary attacker for that deck. But it can show up potentially in different standard decks if there's more effects that allow you to discard during battle phase and have ways to give power to it, because that's the main issue with this card is it doesn't gain power and it's just a 6k, so even giving it 5k doesn't let it hit a grade 3 unit. But if there's ever a deck that can support this in standard, this card will be very strong. Outside of that, it can just be good discard fodder whenever you ride, and then you can call it to be aggressive with. And then for some orders, we have Call and Response, which rests a rearguard to call something from top 3, allowing you to dig through your deck a bit deeper. And if you have a main phase way to bounce those rearguards back into your hand, then resting for cost doesn't really do anything. And you can use it to like replay on-play effects. Bubble Soap Garden, which is Cab-Blast to draw 2 if you have a full board. But there's also True-Hearted Ruby, which is Cab-Blast to draw 2, but you discard 1 and put Ruby in the soul. So you don't net any card advantage, but you do get a soul out of it compared to Bubble Soap Garden. And then last normal order is Harmonious Offshot, which is Energy Blast 2 to give 3 different named units plus 5k power. This is a grade 2 normal order, so you can use it early game in order to build really tall columns to make it really hard for the opponent to guard with. You can also play Super Aesthetic Shot, which is a double rare, but it's a grade 3 normal order that gives you, the player, the skill that all of your rearguards get plus 5k power. So that will generally be better, but Harmonious Offshot is also not that bad either if you want to be a lot more aggressive with it. And then lastly, there's 2 Blitz orders. There's Before the Festival Begins, which is new. You play it with Cab-Blast 1, and it's 5k shield for each of your open rearguards, making it good in decks that clear the board really easily. So like Felty Rosa can play this pretty well. But the primary Blitz order that is played in this nation is Vibrant Symphony, which is a 30k shield if your Vanguard has been hit this turn. Just being a free 30k shield is really good, and I often play this in a lot of lyrical decks as well, just because of how free it is and how much shield it actually gives. And that's it. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you guys in the next one.